Have you ever noticed anything strange about toys? The story my friend told me shocked me, so listen. I've never liked dolls. Something about them has always unsettled me. The glassy eyes, the stiff little fingers, the way they always seem to be watching. But I never thought much of it until last year, when my daughter Lily got one as a gift. That's when everything changed. It started on her 6th birthday. My wife, Sarah, and I had thrown her a small party. Just a few family members, some cupcakes, and a pile of brightly wrapped presents. Lily was at that age where everything excited her. So each gift she unwrapped was met with squeals and bouncing feet. But one present stood out. It was from my mother-in-law, Diane. I remember the way Lily's face lit up as she pulled the doll from the box. It was old-fashioned, with soft cloth limbs and a porcelain head. Its dress was a faded blue, trimmed with lace, and its golden curls were slightly frizzy, as if it had been handled often. The eyes, though deep blue glass, were too lifelike, too sharp for something that should have been stuffed on a shelf and forgotten decades ago. Lily named her Rosie on the spot. Sarah laughed, saying it looked just like one she had as a child. Diane swore it was the same one, passed down through the family. A classic, she called it. Much better than those plastic things they make now. I didn't argue. It was just a doll. Or at least that's what I told myself. At first, everything seemed normal. Lily adored Rosie, carrying her everywhere, tucking her in at night, even insisting on setting an extra plate for her at the dinner table. It was cute. In that way little kids can make anything seem harmless. But something about the doll still nagged at me. Maybe it was the way it seemed to appear in different spots whenever I glanced at it. I'd see it on Lily's bed, then later on her desk, then back on the bed again. At first, I figured Lily was just moving it around. Then, one night, I found Rosie sitting on the living room couch. I had stayed up late watching TV after Sarah and Lily had gone to bed. I was getting ready to turn off the lights when I noticed it. Rosie, perfectly posed on the center cushion, hands resting on her lap, head tilted just slightly forward. I frowned. I was sure Lily had gone to bed hours ago, and Sarah wouldn't have left the doll there. I picked it up, feeling the cool porcelain against my palm, and carried it back to Lily's room. She was fast asleep, breathing softly, her small fingers curled around the blanket. I set Rosie down on the nightstand and pulled the covers up over Lily's shoulders. The room felt strangely colder than the rest of the house. Just my imagination, I told myself. As I turned to leave, I could swear I heard something. Faint, almost like a whisper. I froze. The sound had come from behind me, from the nightstand. I held my breath and listened. The house was silent. Maybe it was just the air vents or my tired mind playing tricks on me. I shook it off and walked out, shutting the door softly behind me. But for the first time, I felt a twinge of unease about that damn doll. Over the next few days, my unease about Rosie grew. It was little things at first, easy to brush off. I'd find her in different spots than where I'd last seen her. But I always convinced myself that Lily had moved her. After all, she was 6, constantly playing, constantly shifting things around. But then, Lily started saying strange things. "Daddy, Rosie talks to me at night." She said it casually over breakfast one morning, as if she were telling me about a dream. I nearly choked on my coffee. "She what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Lily took another bite of her cereal, swinging her little legs under the table. "She whispers to me when the lights are off, but she only talks when I'm alone." Sarah chuckled, ruffling Lily's hair. "That's cute, sweetie. Maybe you're dreaming it." Lily shook her head, suddenly serious. "No, she tells me stories. And sometimes, she moves when I look away." That made my skin prickle. I glanced at Sarah, expecting some kind of reaction, but she was already up, rinsing her plate. "Rosie doesn't really talk, honey," I said carefully. "She's just a toy." Lily's big brown eyes met mine. "She says you don't like her." I stared at her, my throat suddenly dry. Before I could respond, she hopped down from her chair and ran off to her room, leaving me with an uneasy weight in my chest. I tried to ignore it. Kids had wild imaginations. But that night, something happened that I couldn't explain. It was late. I had fallen asleep on the couch, the flickering blue light from the TV casting strange shadows across the walls. The house was quiet, too quiet. I shifted, about to get up and head to bed, when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The doll. Rosie was sitting on the armchair across the room. I hadn't put her there. A cold feeling crept over me as I slowly sat up. The position she was in, hands resting gently on her lap, head tilted slightly, felt deliberate, like she had been carefully placed there. I swallowed, telling myself that Lily must have brought her downstairs. Maybe she had woken up and left the doll here before going back to bed. But then, something shifted. A shadow, a flicker of movement. So subtle I almost missed it. Rosie's head. It had been tilted one way a second ago, and now it was different. Straighter, more alert. A deep, crawling dread settled in my stomach. My pulse hammered in my ears. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was overtired, that there was no way that the doll had moved. I forced myself to get up, every step toward the doll feeling heavier than it should have. I reached out, my fingers hovering just above the porcelain cheek. Cold. Unnaturally cold. Like it had been sitting outside in the snow. I grabbed it roughly and carried it upstairs, checking on Lily before setting Rosie down on the dresser. Lily was sound asleep, her small form rising and falling under the covers. As I turned to leave, I hesitated. A strange impulse took hold of me, something I didn't fully understand. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and set it against the bookshelf, facing the bed. A quiet voice in my mind whispered, "See for yourself." Then I shut the door behind me. The next morning, I woke up with a lingering sense of unease. The memory of Rosie on the armchair still clung to me, like the remnants of a bad dream. Sarah was already up, making breakfast, and Lily was humming to herself at the table, brushing Rosie's hair with a tiny plastic comb. The sight of the doll made my stomach tighten, but I forced a smile. "Sleep okay, kiddo?" I asked, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. Lily nodded. "Rosie told me another story." I hesitated. "Yeah? What about?" She looked up at me with those big, serious eyes. "She told me about her old family. She said they didn't listen to her either." I nearly dropped my coffee. "What?" Lily shrugged like it was nothing. "She said they ignored her. And then they went away." Sarah laughed softly from the stove. "That's a little creepy, honey." Lily just smiled and went back to brushing the doll's hair. I swallowed hard, my mind racing back to the night before. The doll's position, the way its head had seemed to shift. It had to be in my head. Stress, lack of sleep, something. But then I remembered my phone. I had left it recording in Lily's room overnight. I waited until I was alone to check the footage. Sarah had taken Lily to the store, leaving me in a quiet house with nothing but my own racing thoughts. I picked up my phone, my palms suddenly damp as I opened the video. At first it was just Lily, asleep in bed. The dim glow of her nightlight cast long shadows across the room. Everything looked normal. I fast-forwarded. Still normal. Just a sleeping child, the slow rise and fall of her breath, the occasional shift under the covers. Rosie sat motionless on the dresser, her glassy eyes staring forward. I sped up the playback again. Hours passed in seconds. Then, around 3 a.m., something changed. Lily stirred, shifting onto her side. At the same time, the nightlight flickered just once, barely noticeable. Then Rosie moved. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like she suddenly stood up and walked across the room. It was small, almost imperceptible. A slight tilt of her head, as if she were watching Lily sleep. My breath caught in my throat. I rewound and watched again. At 3:04 a.m., her head tilted. At 3:05 a.m., her fingers twitched. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding in my ears. This had to be some kind of trick of the light. Maybe the way the shadows moved made it look like she had shifted. I kept watching. At 3:07 a.m., the night light flickered again. And at 3:08 a.m., Lily sat up in bed. Not in a slow, sleepy way. It was sudden, like she had been pulled from a deep dream. She looked straight ahead, unblinking. Then, in the faintest whisper, I heard her speak. "Okay, Rosie. I won't tell." The screen went dark. The video had stopped recording on its own. I stared at the phone, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. My thoughts felt scrambled, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe the app had glitched. Maybe Lily had been dreaming. Maybe, I looked up, heart hammering. Rosie wasn't on the dresser anymore. She was on Lily's bed, and I hadn't put her there. My blood ran cold. I knew. I hadn't touched Rosie since setting her on the dresser last night, and yet, there she was, sitting neatly on Lily's bed, hands folded primly in her lap, head tilted just so. I forced myself to move, to reach out and pick up the doll. The porcelain was ice cold against my fingers, just like before. My stomach twisted. I could still hear Lily's voice from the recording. "Okay, Rosie. I won't tell." "Tell what?" A shiver ran down my spine as I turned the doll over in my hands. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Sarah had come in and moved her this morning. Maybe Lily had woken up early and forgotten about it. I swallowed hard and walked out of the room, taking Rosie with me. I wasn't sure what I was planning to do. Throw her away? Lock her in a closet? I just needed her out of Lily's room. As I reached the hallway, something made me stop. A sound. A tiny, almost imperceptible click, like plastic tapping against wood. My grip on Rosie tightened. The noise had come from Lily's room, but she wasn't home. Sarah wasn't home. I turned back, my heart pounding. The room was just as I had left it. Empty, quiet, and then, the closet door moved. Not much, just an inch, just enough for the hinge to creak. I stood frozen, my breath locked in my chest. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing down on me. My fingers flexed around the doll, every nerve screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't. I stepped forward. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. Slowly, carefully, I pulled it open. Nothing. Just rows of tiny clothes, shelves stacked with stuffed animals and forgotten toys. The air inside smelled like fabric softener and dust. But something felt off. I was about to close the door when I saw them. Tiny, shallow scratches on the inside of the doorframe, right at Rosie's height. My breath hitched. The marks were fresh. Splintered wood, little jagged lines, almost like fingernails. I took a step back, my pulse roaring in my ears. My mind raced for an explanation, any explanation, but none of them made sense. None of them made me feel safe. I turned, gripping Rosie tighter, and left the room. I had to get rid of her. When Sarah and Lily got home, I didn't say anything. I didn't want to scare them, didn't want to sound like some lunatic who was afraid of a doll. But I didn't put Rosie back. That night, after they went to bed, I took her outside. The wind had picked up, rustling through the trees as I walked to the trash bin by the curb. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. I opened the lid, my fingers clenched around the doll's stiff little body. For a split second, I hesitated. Then I threw her in, slammed the lid shut, and walked back inside without looking back. I locked the doors, checked on Lily, climbed into bed beside Sarah, exhausted but relieved. It was over, or so I thought, because when I woke up the next morning, Rosie was sitting on the nightstand, right beside my bed, and her head was turned toward me. I can't describe the feeling that came over me in that moment. A slow, creeping horror, like ice slipping beneath my skin. I sat up too fast, nearly knocking over the lamp, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Rosie was there, sitting perfectly upright, hands resting in her lap. The same as always, except now, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking at me. I reached out, hesitantly, my fingers hovering inches from her porcelain face. The moment I touched her, I recoiled. She was freezing, not just cool like porcelain should be. She was ice cold, like something left outside on a winter night. Sarah stirred beside me, groggy. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer, couldn't. I was staring at the doll, at the smooth, unblinking face that shouldn't be here. Sarah sat up, rubbing her eyes. Then she saw it. Wait! Wasn't that in Lily's room? I swallowed hard. I threw it away. That woke her up fast. What? I forced myself to look away from the doll. Last night, I put her in the outside bin. My voice sounded distant, wrong, like it belonged to someone else. She shouldn't be here. Sarah frowned, clearly not understanding the depth of my fear. She picked Rosie up, turning her over in her hands. Babe, you probably just forgot. Maybe Lily brought her back inside. I shook my head. No way. Sarah sighed, placing Rosie on the dresser. You're stressing yourself out. It's just a doll. I wanted to argue, to tell her about the scratches in the closet, about the recording, about the way Rosie had been cold. But the words stuck in my throat, 'cause deep down I knew how it would sound. Crazy. Instead, I forced a breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. Yeah, maybe, but I didn't believe it. Not for a second. That day, I kept a close eye on Rosie. I didn't touch her, but I noted where she was every time I passed the room. Morning, on the dresser. Afternoon, still there. By evening, I started to relax. Maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe Lily had found her in the trash and brought her back without mentioning it. But that didn't explain how she ended up on my nightstand. I went to bed uneasy. The house was quiet. Still. Too still. Somewhere in the dead of night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The room was silent. The air thick with that heavy, suffocating quiet that only happens in the deepest hours of the night. Then I heard it. A soft, plastic tapping sound. My breath hitched. I lay frozen, ears straining. The noise was coming from Lily's room. Click. Slow. Rhythmic. Like little fingers drumming against wood. I sat up, every nerve screaming at me to stay put, to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But I couldn't. I had to know. Slowly, carefully, I got out of bed. The hallway stretched ahead of me, long and dark. Lily's door was slightly open, a sliver of faint nightlight glow spilling out. I stepped forward. The tapping stopped. I hesitated, my pulse hammering. Then I heard something even worse. A whisper. Faint, almost too soft to hear, but unmistakable. A child's voice. Lily's voice. Okay, Rosie. I'll do it. A chill ran down my spine. My shaking hand pressed against the door, and I pushed it open. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness of the house. Lily was sitting up in bed, her small figure bathed in the dim glow of the night light. Her eyes were half-lidded, her expression blank, and Rosie was in her lap. I felt something inside me go cold. Lily! My voice came out hoarse, unsteady. She didn't respond right away, just sat there, staring at the doll, fingers gently stroking the fabric of its dress. Then, in that same soft, detached voice, she whispered, I have to do it. I swallowed hard, stepping closer. My skin prickled with an overwhelming sense of wrongness, like I had walked into something I wasn't meant to see. Do what, sweetheart? Lily blinked slowly. Then, finally, she looked up at me. Her expression was distant, her face slack, like she wasn't fully awake. Rosie says it's time. A thick, suffocating silence filled the room. My heart pounded against my ribs. I knelt beside her bed, carefully prying Rosie from her grip. Lily didn't resist. The doll was freezing. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. Lily, listen to me. Rosie's just a toy. She doesn't tell you things. Lily's brows knitted together. But she does. I shook my head, forcing a smile that felt completely unnatural. I think maybe you're dreaming, kiddo. Lily's lip trembled. I don't want to make her mad. A pulse of pure dread shot through me. I forced myself to stay calm. Sweetheart, nothing bad is going to happen. I promise. Lily hesitated. Then, in a small voice, she said, That's what the others said too. I felt my stomach drop. The others? A metallic taste filled my mouth. I needed to get out of that room. Needed to get Lily away from that thing. I picked up Rosie and stood. Go back to sleep, okay? We'll talk in the morning. Lily didn't argue. She just laid back down, her small hands clutching the blanket. As I turned to leave, I glanced back one last time. Lily was staring at me. Or no, not at me. At Rosie. And her lips moved in a whisper I couldn't hear. I took the doll downstairs, every nerve in my body on high alert. The house felt wrong. Silent but not peaceful. Like something was waiting. I threw Rosie into the hall closet and slammed the door. My mind was racing. Lily's voice echoed in my head. That's what the others said too. What the hell did that mean? I tried to shake it off, but sleep never came. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound, any sign of movement. None came, but I still felt watched. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of crying. Lily. My heart lurched as I bolted upright. The house was still dark, but the crying was unmistakable, soft, hiccuping sobs, drifting down the hallway. I threw off the blankets and rushed toward her room, my pulse thudding in my ears. The door was wide open, and Lily was sitting in the middle of the floor, her tiny shoulders trembling. Sweetheart. I knelt beside her, gripping her arms gently. What's wrong? She wouldn't look at me. Her eyes were locked on something behind me. I turned. The closet door was open, and Rosie was sitting in the doorway. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I had locked her in the hall closet. I knew I had. Cold terror crept over me, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. Slowly, I reached out and picked up the doll. Lily whimpered. She's mad at you. A chill slid down my spine. No, sweetheart, I whispered. She's just a doll. Lily shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. She says you don't believe. That's why she won't stop. I clenched my jaw, forcing my hands to stay steady. Lily, how did Rosie get in here? She wiped her nose with the sleeve of her pajama top. She walked. I swallowed hard. Lily, she moves when you're not looking, Lily whispered. A deep, nauseating dread curled in my stomach. I picked up the doll and stood, my entire body tense. Go back to bed, sweetheart. It's okay. Lily didn't argue. She just crawled back under the covers, curling into a tight ball. I waited until her breathing slowed before backing out of the room, Rosie still clutched in my hands. I wasn't going to throw her away again. I wasn't going to hide her. I was going to destroy her. I took Rosie outside. The wind had picked up, making the trees groan and creak overhead. The night smelled like damp earth, and the air felt unnaturally cold against my skin. I grabbed the metal fire pit from the side of the house, dragged it onto the patio, and threw Rosie inside. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the lighter fluid from the shelf. I didn't hesitate. I poured the liquid over her small body, soaking the fabric, the porcelain, the stiff blonde curls. Then I lit a match. The fire roared to life instantly, orange and hungry, flames licking up the sides of the doll's body. The smell of burning cloth filled the air. I exhaled, my shoulders sagging. It was over. Rosie was gone. Or so I thought. Because as the fire crackled, as I watched the doll blacken and curl, she laughed. Not a loud, obvious laugh. Not something that could have been mistaken for the wind or the crackling of the flames. A soft, childish giggle, high-pitched, right at my ear. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. But there was no one there, just the empty yard, and the echo of that impossible, lingering laugh. I stood frozen, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The fire in the pit flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows across the yard. But I wasn't looking at the flames anymore. I was listening. The laugh, that giggle, still rang in my ears impossibly close, like someone had been standing right behind me. I turned back to the fire, my stomach twisting. Rosie's body was still there, blackened and curling, her cloth dress disintegrating into ash. The porcelain had cracked in places, hair singed away. But her mouth was still intact. And I could swear, it was open wider than before, like she was smiling. A wave of nausea rolled through me. My fingers clenched into fists. No, this was nothing. Just paranoia. Just my brain twisting things, feeding into my exhaustion and fear. I forced myself to step back, inhaling deep, shaky breaths. The fire would finish the job. Rosie would be nothing but ashes by morning. It was over. I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't, because the moment I stepped into the house, the air felt different, heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. I forced myself up the stairs, each step slow and deliberate. My head ached, my limbs felt sluggish. When I reached Lily's room, I cracked the door open just enough to peek inside. She was asleep, small, peaceful, tucked beneath her blankets. Good. I exhaled and went to my own room. Sarah was still fast asleep, her breathing soft and steady. I slid under the covers beside her, my body aching with exhaustion. Sleep pulled at me immediately, but just as I started to drift off, a sound, a faint, rhythmic click. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head slowly. The closet door was open, and on the floor, just visible in the sliver of moonlight, were tiny, fresh scratches, like something had been dragging its fingers across the wood. A deep, paralyzing dread settled in my chest. I sat up, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run, to wake Sarah, to grab Lily and leave the house and never come back. But I couldn't move, because right then, the bedroom door creaked open, and standing in the hallway was Lily. Her nightgown hung loose around her small frame, her long hair tangled from sleep. But she wasn't moving. She was just standing there, staring at me, and in her arms, she was holding Rosie. Her dress was still burnt, her face was still cracked, but her eyes were whole, glass blue, shining, and they were locked onto mine. Lily's lips parted, and in a voice that was not her own, she whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." A cold wave of terror rolled through me, pinning me in place. I wanted to move, wanted to grab Lily, shake her awake, but my body wouldn't respond. She stood in the doorway, clutching the burnt, broken doll against her chest. The dim hallway light cast sharp shadows across her face, making her look eerily hollow, empty. I forced my voice to work. "Lily, where did you get that?" She didn't answer. I glanced at Sarah, still sleeping, unaware of the nightmare unfolding beside her. My breath was shallow, my fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. "Lily," I said again, firmer this time, "put Rosie down." A slow, unnatural smile crept across her lips. "She's not Rosie anymore," she whispered. A sharp chill shot down my spine. I swallowed hard, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Lily, sweetheart, come here. Let's go back to bed. Okay?" She didn't move, didn't blink. Then, the closet door slammed shut on its own. I jumped, my heart hammering. Sarah stirred beside me with a groggy noise, shifting under the blankets. Lily's smile widened. I bolted out of bed, reaching for her. But as soon as my fingers touched her skin, her body collapsed. She crumpled to the floor like a rag doll, eyes rolling back, limbs limp. "Lily!" My voice cracked. I dropped to my knees, shaking her, but she wouldn't wake up. Sarah was up now, her panicked voice breaking through the thick, suffocating air. "What's happening? What's wrong with her?" "I don't..." My throat clenched as I scooped Lily into my arms, pressing my hand to her cheek. Cold, too cold. And then, she gasped. Her little body jerked like something had snapped back into place. Her chest rose sharply, her hands twitching. Then, all at once, she started sobbing, clinging to me with trembling fingers. "Daddy?" she whimpered, her voice small, fragile. "What happened?" I held her tight, my heart still racing. "It's okay, baby. You're okay." Sarah was beside us now, running her hands over Lily's face, smoothing back her hair. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Lily's whole body was shaking. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. I swallowed hard, holding her closer. "What kind of dream?" She hesitated, pressing her face against my shoulder. She was inside me. A slow, sickening dread curled in my stomach. "Who, sweetheart?" Sarah asked softly. Lily's tiny fingers clutched my shirt. "Rosie," she whispered. She didn't want to go away. She said I was warm. She wanted to stay. Sarah and I locked eyes over Lily's head, our faces pale, drained. And then, just when I thought it was over, Lily lifted her head, looking past me, her expression darkening. Her small voice trembled. "Daddy," she whimpered. "She's behind you." A cold breath skimmed the back of my neck, and somewhere just behind me, I heard a soft, giggling laugh.